So we can get this show on the road. This is session 2D for those who can read. The official title is Discovering Content in Scholarly Publications, How do Publishers Need to Adapt to Geographic, Cultural, and Age Differences in Readership and Research Behavior. And three presenters today, or three contributors to this discussion today. Myself, Don Samulack, so I'm President U.S. Operations of a company, Editage Cactus Communications, based in the U.S. just outside of Philadelphia. Simon Inger is President of Simon Inger Consulting in the U.K., and Philippa Benson, Managing Editor, Science Advances at AAAS here in the U.S. as well. This is a session that came together with an odd history, but Simon's data is extensive, and the intent of this discussion is to be very collaborative and very discussion-airy in the sense that there is a lot of data, and everybody's going to have potentially a different view of what they see in the data that's going to be presented. And we'll be using a technology called Slido, sli.do, that you can access on your handheld to ask questions at any time. You see something in the data, just write down what the slide was and your observation, and we'll start addressing those so we can look for other pieces of the data that's beyond what Simon presents or what Philippa and I bring forward in discussion. So it's meant to be a relatively collaborative discussion. We have an hour and a half, and let's see here if the technology works for my... It's not advancing. Okay, there we go. So the other disclaimer, obviously, is statements and opinions that are being expressed by the panelists are those of the individuals, not necessarily the companies or organizations for whom they work or represent. Slido, as I mentioned, is a technology that we'll be using on our handheld. So you go to sli.do, you could download the app, but you could use it on the web as well. And you just simply put in the code 6864, and you'll end up with an interface where you can type in any questions. Great technology for any speakers or coursework or anything you're doing. It also can do polls and things, which we're not going to get into, but just so that you know, it's a great little technology. And with that, so I'm going to present a little bit of perspective, and then I'm going to sit down, and Philippa will be overtaking moderation of the session, and Simon will be driving the data. And so Philippa and myself will be giving commentary to the data. In addition to what Simon says, we'll be monitoring questions from the audience through Slido. If you don't use Slido and you wish to stand up at any time, please do. There's a lot of content to go through, so we're going to have to see how it paces out, and we may only rely on the questions through Slido just to keep the conversation going. So before I get started in my discussion and my short presentation in this regard, I'm wondering of the audience, just so we know who is represented in the audience, a show of hands, who are actual publishers, and including journals, so the majority of the room, and in a vendor community, so there's a small number of vendors. Now, of the room, how many have actually physically spent a lot of time or any time outside what I'll call the West, North America, Europe? And so this is people who are spending time in China or other emerging markets. Show of hands again. So we're talking maybe about an eighth of the room. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about and exploring are the differences that are cultural, age demographic, and other aspects of geographics in the realm of publishing and how faculty and others view that which is published. So myself, again, Don Samulack, I represent the company Editage Cactus Communications, and we work with a lot of authors worldwide in language publishing and a variety of other author support capacities, and it's always been a great passion of mine to understand what the futures holds for how the current generation of researchers, as they're going to get older and as technologies come in and the new digital group of younger generation comes up, what's that going to actually mean for how we need to project to be at the right place at the right time in providing content in the right manner for those who are going to adopt it. How are adoption standards of content going to change as demographics flex? And in order to be very agile as a publisher and to be very successful as a publisher, whether it be society or journal or subscription or whatever, you need to be aware of these trends because they are pretty significant. And if you haven't thought about them, hopefully this will be a little bit of an eye-opener. So we have been, and I apologize, I am recovering from a cold, so I got a dry cough, and hopefully I won't go into huge coughing fits. But we have been very successful at globalizing the world. The West has impressed itself on many other areas around the globe, many other cultures in both technology and content and presence and guidelines and a whole bunch of things. So the world is now very flat, and with it being very flat comes also the responsibility to not only understand what's going on in our own backyard, whether it be North America or Europe, but to also understand what's going on in other geographic areas and respond to those geographic area needs. And when we think of the world as a whole, there are what are called low context cultures, and there are what are called high context cultures. And so for those who are not necessarily aware of those labels, a low context culture like North America or much of Western Europe, they're very logical, linear, individualistic, and action-oriented in how they act, how they think. And people in low context cultures generally value logic, value facts, directness. Solving a problem means lining up the facts, evaluating, and being very, very decision-oriented on fact. Discussions end with actions. Communicators are expected to be straightforward, concise, efficient, and we are looking for always that clarity. To be absolutely clear, they strive to use precise words, intend them to be taken literally. Explicit contracts, and if you're just thinking of contracts, include a lot of negotiation. And it's very different from high context cultures who depend on language precision and who depend less on language decision and legal documents. And in fact, high context cultures would actually distrust very large documents as, it's just not necessary. And in what I do, you may have, working with publisher, working with farmer, whatever, a 60-page legal document that defines everything of the relationship. Whereas in South Korea, it may be 2 pages and a stamp and a signature and a handshake. So this is just a very basic indication of, in cultural differences, where things start. So in high context cultures, just to have a comparison, high context cultures are relational, collectivist, intuitive, contemplative. Interpersonal relationships are really emphasized. Development of trust is an important first step to any business transaction. People in these cultures are less governed by reason than intuition or feelings, and words are not so important as context, which might include tone of voice and facial expression, gestures, and things of this nature. And whether you're in business meetings or whether you're communicating in different geographic areas of the world, this is actually very important in order to get your message across. So it was quoted in this source, a Japanese manager explained his culture's communication style to an American. We're a homogeneous people. We don't have to speak as much as you do here. We say one word, we understand 10, but you have to say 10 to understand 1. So context in culture is, I'm just emphasizing this, is a very important in communication. And it comes up in many situations where, as you travel internationally, you find yourself trying to communicate to someone and you say, okay, well, we're dealing with context issues here that they don't understand, or I'm overshooting them, and you need to build that commonality. So similarly in publication, you need to deliver content, and the platforms have to be user-friendly and other things in order to efficiently build that commonality with culture on levels of context. Then you have now the generational issues with respect to age and digital. There's some great books. One is Don Tapscott's Growing Up Digital, and then his second book, or not his second, but the second in the series, Growing Up Digital. So Growing Up Digital was people who really were on the front end of the phase of web, and those who are now growing up digital, including my 16, 17-year-old, that's all they know. I mean, my son's first toy was my old Palm 5, which many of you in the room may remember, and the Palm 5 had a doodle app on it, and that was his first gaming experience when he was 1.5, was doodling on my Palm 5. And so digital and handhelds and that experience is literally how the grown-up digital age interfaces with technology, interfaces with content. So some of the quotes from this excerpt of a book review of the grown-up digital is, well, baby boomers, to a certain extent, the Generation Xers who followed them use technology to help them in their work and their leisure, and the key word is use them. The members of the net generation, or Generation Y, have grown up digital and are therefore totally immersed in the technology and its possibilities. And they have different expectations as what is delivered to them, how it's delivered to them, how accessible, how discoverable, because quite honestly, they're not going to spend the time going circuitous routes to find something. They are a very expectant population that things should be just very intuitive and easy to find. So in the book, Don writes, sure as you're as cyber sophisticated as the next person, you shop online, you use Wikipedia, and do BlackBerry prayer throughout the day, but young people have a natural affinity for technology, and that seems uncanny. They instinctively turn first to the net to communicate, understand, learn, find, and do many things. And you know, I've watched my son grow up, and this is just a personal thing, but I can honestly say that I honestly believe his generation are able to digitally multitask. They are able to process information in parallel, which we in the older generation think we do, but really don't. And so whether they're gaming or they are doing other things, their brain is really working very differently. And it's these types of things that we want to try to bring forward in how we look at the data that Simon's going to present. So on the demographic aspect of things, if you just look at China and India, and these are data from 2010, 2011, the demographics of China is a relatively older population, where the demographics of India is really bottom heavy. There's a huge digital population coming up that is getting quite affluent. So the red line is an estimate of everybody who grew up digital, and that red line is obviously going to grow up throughout the chart. But it shows up yellow. It's actually sort of green, or supposed to be green. But the range in the left-hand or right-hand bar is more or less what I would speculate as the research audience. Everybody from a doctoral student, postdoc, up to tenured faculty, and I mean it can be much more, but that's a large range. So when you look at the population and how the population exists more or less today. And it's not necessarily that this population is going to uniformly move up. I'm going to show you in the next slide actually how populations really do change in projection. But the take home on this slide is clearly, even between China and India, the two major consumers of information in the future, just by population number, literally 2.5 billion people in totality, they are going to need to be approached fairly differently, because the Indian population is going to be hugely digital, and the China population, just in age and exposure, that younger generation, because of one-child rule, is going to be moving up, and there's going to be less of that influence. And these are just speculative decisions. Don't make any investments upon them. I urge you that these are just my opinions, but that's a joke. So But if you look at Japan, 1960s to 2010 to 2060, it's a common phrase, from tree to kite. Their demographics are hugely changing. The tree being on the left, the whatever it is in the middle, and what they refer to as the kite on the right. So Japan's population right now is very old and getting increasingly old, and they're actually very concerned about the fact that the older generation is not passing off enough to the younger generation on business and other things, but just so that you know, in demographics, as we move forward, the younger generation is being squeezed. And so again, I put the same red bar and the green bar or yellow bar just to show you where that sits right now, or well, in 2010, but where it's projected to go with life and expectancy, et cetera, towards 2060. So these demographics do change, and so you need to sort of watch this space. But again, taking the take-home message really is that as we look at the data that is about to be presented, I want you to look at it with the framework that this is dynamic, that it's dynamic not only on culture, which could be relatively static, but it's certainly dynamic on age group and how age group interacts with technology and how they immerse themselves in content. And so with that, I will transition over to Simon.